Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Mike, who's been supporting this channel as a Golden Big Tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Mike, so again, Mike, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck, Mike chose a deck around Araumi of the Dead Tide, focusing on self-mill to encore creatures with good ETB and attack triggers. So Araumi of the Dead Tide is a 1/4 Merfolk wizard that costs 1 blue-black. It has tap, exile cards from your graveyard equal to the number of opponents you have. Target creature card in your graveyard gains Encore until end of turn. The Encore cost is its mana cost. And again, encoring essentially means that you exile the creature card and pay its mana cost. For each opponent, you create a token that's a copy that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. So yeah, Araumi can be an incredibly effective commander if you're able to get the right creatures into your graveyard and the right creatures out by encoring them. The more opponents that you have, the more token copies of that creature you get, and you can get a ton of fantastic effects, you know, again with ETBs or attack triggers, and yeah, you can really take over the game pretty quickly once you're set up correctly. Also, there are a ton of fantastic budget cards that work very well with this commander, and every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck. So with all that said, let's jump into it. So first up, let's talk about creatures that can actually help us mill ourselves with cards like Mire Triton, Undead Butler, and Wall of Lost Thoughts. Mire Triton is a 2/1 with Death Touch that has, when it enters the battlefield, mill 2 cards and you gain 2 life. That life gain is nice, but yeah, being able to mill ourselves with a creature like this one can be very impactful. Especially again when this is in our graveyard and we can encore it out for just 2 mana in total, and again with 3 opponents, that's going to be what, 3 ETBs to mill ourselves for 6 and gain 6 life? And again, on top of that, also just having a 2/1 that's attacking with Death Touch, so our opponents are either going to have to lose a creature or take some damage. But speaking of milling creatures, of course, we also have Undead Butler, a 1/2 zombie that has, when it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. So again, with an encore, that's going to be, what, 9? On top of that, when it dies, we can exile it, and if we do, return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. And then Wall of Lost Thoughts is a 0/4 with Defender, and when it enters the battlefield, target player mills 4 cards. So again, for just 2 mana, with 1 creature, we can target ourselves 3 with this, again on Encore, to mill ourselves for 12. Speaking of which, there's Crow of Dark Tidings, a 2/1 flying zombie bird that has, when it enters the battlefield or dies, mill 2 cards. Again, assuming 3 opponents, that's what, 3 times 2 times 2, so 12? And an even bigger effect comes from Dream Eater, a 4/3 Nightmare Sphinx with flash and flying, and when it enters the battlefield, we surveil 4. And on top of that, we can bounce target non-land permanent and opponent controls back to its owner's hand. A reminder that Surveil 4 is kind of like Scry, but instead of actually putting the card in the bottom of our library, we can put it in our graveyard, so we can essentially mill ourselves for 12. Or, you know, keep something on top out of that. And again, when I say mill 12, again, I am assuming we have 3 opponents, so we get 3 copies of this with an encore. So yeah, mill 12 and bounce 3 things, that can be really effective in a lot of scenarios. And of course, we also have some more standard ways to ramp with things like Perpetual Timepiece and Chronic Flooding. Perpetual Timepiece has tap mill 2, and Chronic Flooding has enchant land. Whenever enchanted land becomes tapped, its controller puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. So just put this on one of your lands and mill yourself for 3 every single time you tap it. Next up, we also have a card with Embalmer's Tools, which can help us out in multiple ways. It says, activate abilities of creature cards in your graveyard cost 1 less to activate. Again, Araumi actually gives that encore ability to the creature in our graveyard, so now whenever we encore, it's going to cost us 1 less. On top of that, we do have a few zombies in this deck, and when we tap an untapped zombie we control, we can make target player put the top card of their library into their graveyard. So again, essentially, hey, now your zombies can have you mill for 1. So with an encore with something like Mire Triton or Undead Butler, we can actually now mill ourselves with those cards coming in too. You know, on top of the mill that we already get from their ETBs. Regardless, other cards that can help us with our mana situation are cards like Solemn Simulacrum, Deranged Assistant, and Milliken. Sad Robot is a 2/2 golem that has when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and when it dies, you may draw a card. So encoring this again for 4 mana, we get 3 copies, we ramp with 3 lands, and we also get to draw 3 cards when those copies die. And then Deranged Assistant and Milliken essentially do the exact same thing. They have tap, mill a card, add colorless. So these mana dorks can help us ramp as well as mill ourselves consistently throughout the game. And of course, really quick, we also have some more standard ramp cards with cards like Sky Diamond, Ebony Fly, Prismatic Lens, Everflowing Child, Seedtorn Archive, Mind Stone, Firebind Vessel, Star Compass, and Charcoal Diamond. And now I'm out of breath. Moving on top of ramp cards that help us out with our game plan as well, we also have cards that help us out with card advantage too. For example, Mold Drifter is a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, we draw 2 cards and we can evoke it for 2 and a blue. So by evoking it, we're going to be sacrificing it essentially right away to get it into our graveyard. So we draw 2, get it into our graveyard, and then we can make our commander encore it out so that we can draw, 2 cards for every single copy we make. So again, that's going to be 6 cards most of the time. But then there's Floating Dream Zubair, which can be even more effective. A 1/2 Zubair Spirit that has when it's put into a graveyard from play, draw a card for each Zubair put into a graveyard from play this turn. So when we encore this out and get 3 copies, we're going to be drawing a card for every single one of those copies 3 times. So for just 2 mana, again, because we have to sacrifice each of them, we're going to be drawing 9 cards. And speaking of 9 cards, Impaler Shrike is a 3/1 flying bird that has when deals counter damage to a player, you may sacrifice it if you do draw 3 cards. So again, by encoring it, if we can get it through on each opponent, well, first up, that's 3 damage to each opponent, which is nice. And on top of that, by sacrificing it, we're going to draw 3 cards for each copy. We also have some other creatures that can help us out, though, with cards like Champion of Wits, Atris, and Sphinx of Bethune. Champion of Wits is a 2/1 that has when it enters the battlefield, it may draw cards equal to its power. If you do, discard 2 cards. So this might not be card advantage, but it can be fantastic card selection to help us dig through our deck. And then Atris has, when it enters the battlefield, target opponent looks at the top 3 cards of your library and separates them into a face-down pile and a face-up pile. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So this can be a kind of fun factor fiction type game, but with one of the piles being, unseeable by you. And yeah, you can make some really interesting choices and hopefully get the right things in your graveyard and the right things in your hand. Speaking of which, there's Sphinx of Bethune, a 5/6 flyer that has when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those into 2 piles, put 1 into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So again, basically factor fiction on a creature, and yeah, when you encore this, you get that 3 times. But of course, we also have some more standard card advantage cards with things like Archaeomancer, of course Factor Fiction, Rain of Revelation, Careful Consideration, Forbidden Alchemy, and Thirst for Discovery. Each of these can really help us out in a deck like this. And speaking of getting cards into our graveyard, well, there are cards that can get specific cards into our graveyard with Violent Tumor, Gravebreaker Lamia, and Auric Loremage. Violent Tumor has, when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle. So again, by encoring this, we can tutor for 3 cards to get right into our graveyard, and yeah, that can be incredibly impactful. And speaking of which, Gravebreaker Lamia essentially is the exact same thing, but it's a 4/4 lifelink. And then our Auric Loremage actually has a tap ability that does this, so yeah, we can just tap this throughout the game to get more and more cards into our graveyard and get the right cards into our graveyard. But we can also use a card like Victimize to actually get the right cards out of our graveyard. Basically, this makes us sacrifice 1 creature to get 2 back from our graveyard right into play. This is a fantastic reanimation spell that can also help us get a creature into our graveyard that we can then encore too. And speaking of encoring creatures, some ones that have fantastic ETBs that we really want to get out are cards like Diluvian Primordial, Gyruda, and Overseer of the Damned. Diluvian Primordial is a 5/5 flyer that has when it enters the battlefield for each opponent, you may cast up to 1 target insert a sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If a spell casts this way, we put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So by encoring this again, we're going to be getting 3 5/5 flyers coming at our opponents, and on top of that, of course, we get to cast, well, basically up to 9 instants and sorceries from our opponent's graveyards? Well, 3 per each, but you know what I mean. And speaking of value, how about Gyruda, Doom of the Depths? Gyruda is a 6/6 legendary creature that has, when it enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Put a creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards on the battlefield under your control. So again, because it's a legendary creature, we only get to keep 1 of the encored copies, but still. We have a 6/6 going at 1 opponent, and on top of that, we mill everyone, including ourselves, 12 cards? And then out of those stacks of 4, we also can get up to 3 creatures with an even converted mana cost. And then Overseer of the Damned is a 5/5 demon with flying that has when it enters the battlefield, it may destroy target creature. On top of that, whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So this can come in, again, be a 5/5 flyer that's swinging at all opponents when it's encored, and destroy 3 creatures, and also make us a ton of tokens. Because again, we have got 3 copies, so we get that trigger 3 times. So essentially with every creature dying, we are making 3 zombies. And speaking of making a ton of tokens, we can also utilize cards like Mere Battlesphere and Important Overlord to do so. Mere Battlesphere is a 4/7 that has when it enters the battlefield, create 4 1/1 colorless Mirror artifact creature tokens. On top of that, when it attacks, you can tap X on tap Mirror you control, and if you do, Mere Battlesphere gets +X/+0 until end of turn and deals X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. So with this, first up, you can, well, get a ton of tokens in play. Again, 4 for each copy, so that's what, 12 tokens? And you can also tap all of those tokens and, you know, maybe even 2 of the actual Mere Battlesphere copies to make 1 Mere Battlesphere huge. You know, again, basically giving it, what, +14/+0 until end of turn? And it's gonna ping the player it's attacking for 14. Important Overlord can also make you a ton of tokens. A 6/6 flying demon that has, when it enters the battlefield, put a number of 1/1 black harpy creature tokens with flying on the battlefield equal to your devotion to black. So again, even with just, let's say, your commander and, you know, again, encoring this, your devotion to black is going to be 7. So that is a total of 21 harpy tokens. Good luck to your opponents dealing with all those flyers. And then another ETB option, well, might be quite an interesting one with Body Double. It's a 0/0 that can enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard. So if you've got another creature in your graveyard with a great ETB, or one of your opponent's creatures has one, well, take advantage of that. But the best ETB has got to be from the Golden Pig of our deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig of this deck is Grey Merchant of Asphodel, better known as Gary. Gary is a 2/4 zombie that has, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life for X of your devotion to black. You gain life equal to life lost this way. Again, just in combination with our commander, we are going to have 7 devotion when we encore this. So at a minimum, that is going to be 21 life drain from all of our opponents. And again, if we've got 3 opponents, we're going to be gaining 63 life just by encoring this one creature. And of course, keep in mind that if our devotion goes higher and higher with more and more things in play, well, this can easily be a, you know, one shot to take out all of our opponents from just one creature. So yeah, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, otherwise known as Gary, you are most definitely the Golden Pig of this deck. But of course, we also have some fantastic attack triggers on creatures that we can really take advantage of by encoring them with things like Bane of Balaged, Ulamog's Crusher, and Artisan of Kozilek. Bane of Balaged has, when it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. So again, by, you know, encoring this, we get rid of 6 total permanents. Of course, in a similar way, there's Ulamog's Crusher, an 8/8 with Annihilator 2, and again, Annihilator means when this creature attacks, defending player sacrifices the number of permanents equal to its Annihilator, which again is Annihilator 2, so that's 2 permanents. Speaking of which, there's Artisan of Kozilek, a 10/9, and it says, when you cast this spell, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it's got Annihilator 2. So again, if we can ramp enough to actually cast this, we can reanimate something, and yeah, again, when we actually encore it, we get a lot of Annihilator goodness. But we can also utilize some great attack triggers from things like Rakshasa Debaser and Windraider Sphinx. Rakshasa Debaser has, when it attacks, put target creature card from defending player's graveyard on the battlefield under your control. And this one actually already has an encore cost, but it's actually 2 more than its regular cost, but again with our commander we can lessen that to its actual cost. Regardless, by encoring and getting 3 copies of this to reanimate 3 other creatures, that can really be a huge play. Speaking of which, Windraider Sphinx is a 3/7 flyer that has, whenever a creature with flying attacks, you may draw a card. So again, just by encoring this, we get 3 copies of it, again assuming 3 opponents. When we swing with all of them, each of them trigger 3 times, drawing us 9 cards. And of course, if we have any other flyers in play and we swing, we draw even more. But aside from using creatures to actually benefit us when we encore them, we can also utilize creatures that harm our opponents when we do so with things like Fleshbag Marauder, Demon's Disciple, and Plaguecrafter. Each of these basically do the exact same thing but with some variations. Fleshbag Marauder has, when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. And then Demon's Disciple says, when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. And then Plaguecrafter takes that to another level, saying whenever it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, and each player who can't discards a card. Regardless, again, by encoring any of these out, again, we get 3 copies of them, and we essentially say, hey, we're just probably going to sacrifice these copies of them because we have to sacrifice them anyways, and all of our opponents have to sacrifice a lot of things too. Or we can have a more targeted approach with things like Ravenous Chupacabra and Meteor Golem. Ravenous Chupacabra is a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. Meteor Golem is a 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So whether we're taking out creatures or basically anything non-land, yeah, these can come in really handy. Speaking of which, we also have other removal and wrath spells with things like Feed the Swarm, Whelming Wave, Hex, Aether Gale, Displacement Wave, and Nevinyrral's Disc, which can all help us out in a lot of situations. And to wrap things up, we can also throw another wrench into our opponent's plans with some counter spells with things like Negate, Unwind, and You Find the Villain's Lair. Negate is going to counter-target non-creature spell, Unwind does the exact same thing, but it's also going to untap up to 3 lands, so it basically pays for itself, and You Find the Villain's Lair says choose 1. Counter-target spell or draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So this can either help us counter a spell or get the right cards into our graveyard by helping us draw some more and ditch some cards that, we might want to encore. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. As I mentioned at the start of this episode, every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck with an estimated cost of $28.90. And keep in mind that estimated cost actually includes basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you've got some basic lands lying around, there's some extra savings there. And speaking of extra savings, if you want to potentially save even more, buy this deck on TCG Player and utilize heavily played and damaged cards because, again, those cards need a home too. Though do keep in mind that estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.